To treat a being that feels fear and pain as a mere tool is a fundamental injustice. We call it speciesism, a prejudice based on species, as morally indefensible as racism. It is an ethical imperative to end this practice.
And I call it progress. Every vaccine, every antibiotic, every chemotherapy that has saved you, me, or the people we love was born from this practice. Insulin for diabetics, treatments for HIV. This isn't an abstract debate. It's the difference between life and death for millions.
You celebrate the lives saved, but you erase the cost. A cost paid by 8.8 million animals in Europe alone in a single year. Animals confined to sterile cages, subjected to procedures the law itself classifies as severe. Remember Greenhill? Beagles bred in their own filth, mistreated to death? That wasn't an exception. It was a window into a systemic reality.
Using a case of blatant illegality like Greenhill to tarnish the entire scientific community is a dishonest sleight of hand. It's like condemning all of medicine for a single case of malpractice. The reality is that research is governed by a rigorous ethical principle, the 3 R's: reduction, refinement, and replacement. Animal welfare isn't an obstacle, it's a prerequisite for valid scientific data. A stressed animal is a terrible experimental model.
But the point isn't cleaner cages or slightly less cruel procedures. The point is that the entire paradigm is a scientific dead end. You're defending a model that, by the data, is a failure. Over 90% of drugs that pass animal trials then fail in humans. We are not choosing between the life of a mouse and the life of a child. We are choosing between an old, ineffective science and a new one based on human-relevant models, like organs on a chip, which are faster, cheaper, and more predictive.
Predictive? An organ on a chip cannot replicate the complexity of an immune system, the metabolism of a drug in the liver, or its long-term effects on the brain. What you call alternatives are valuable complementary tools, but they are not substitutes. To abandon animal models now, before these technologies are fully validated, would be an act of reckless irresponsibility. It would mean using human patients as the first-line guinea pigs. The thalidomide tragedy should have taught us that.
Thalidomide is the one exception you always invoke to justify the rule. The rule is a river of failures, and your logic hides a fundamental hypocrisy. If rights are based on superior cognitive abilities, would you be willing to experiment on newborn infants or elderly people with dementia? No. So why on a pig which demonstrates intelligence and sensitivity comparable to that of a young child? Your distinction isn't scientific, it's a prejudice.
That is a false equivalency, a form of emotional blackmail. The human community is founded on a pact of mutual rights and duties, in which animals, by their nature, cannot participate. We have a special duty of care to the most vulnerable members of our own species. That isn't prejudice, it's responsibility. A responsibility that compels us to use every tool available to fight the diseases that plague us.
So, to be clear, your position is that in the search for a potential cure, it is morally acceptable to condemn a dog, a being Tom Regan would call a subject of a life, to an existence of confinement and suffering. You are defending an institution built on legalized cruelty.
And to be just as clear, your position is that to ensure the well-being of that dog, you are willing to stop the research that could save a child from leukemia. You are willing to look a parent in the eye and say, "Oh, I'm sorry, the life of a lab mouse was more important." That is the real brutal consequence of your absolutist ethics.
History does not judge civilizations by how they treat their strongest members, but by how they treat their weakest. And today, the weakest are the animals, sentient beings reduced to laboratory reagents. To continue down this path is not just an ethical failure, it's a failure of imagination. Refusing to invest boldly in alternatives isn't pragmatism, it's moral inertia. The future of science is not in more humane cages, but in laboratories with no cages at all.
Ethics is not an idealistic abstraction. It is a choice between real, often tragic options. Our primary duty is to alleviate human suffering. Biomedical research, with all of its difficult compromises, is the greatest expression of hope humanity has ever conceived against disease. To abandon the most effective tool we have before a proven replacement exists is not an act of compassion. It is an act of surrender that we would pay for with an incalculable price in human lives.